The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to another fun-filled show. This is episode 101, in which we speak with the creator of Darkwing Duck, Tad Stones. Now, Tad is a very cool guy, long history working with Disney, did a lot of work for them, worked for a lot of cartoons, a lot of big ones. If you're like me, Darkwing Duck was a big part of your childhood growing up, and it was a great conversation. We get a lot of insight into that show, that series, why the decisions were made, why it was called Darkwing Duck, how it started, where the sort of impetus of it was. Tad also worked on the Aladdin sequels, Return of Jafar and King of Thieves, both movies that I really, really loved growing up and were really worthy sequels to the original Aladdin film, as well as the Aladdin TV series, all that other fun stuff. But he's worked on a lot of parts of a lot of people's childhoods, big parts, and he certainly has cemented his place in nerddom, in nostalgia history, in Disney history, and created some amazing, amazing things. We have a great conversation. I was overjoyed to chat with him. I was a massive Darkwing Duck fan, and it was really cool. It's, sometimes they say don't meet your heroes. Sometimes you meet them, and they're really cool people. And Tad is a very cool person, and has quite a history in an industry that has touched many, 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 many lives over the years, including mine. So it was a great conversation, a great chat. And yeah, it's actually a long one. We had a really long conversation, so I didn't want to break it up in 2 episodes. I thought you were going to get the whole thing in one go. We're going to try to do that as much as possible. I do break them up sometimes, but I also try not to have crazy long conversations, trying to respect the time of the folks we have on it. But, every once in a while, the conversation just goes that way. They seem to be having a good time, and I let it flow. So this one with Tad went for a little while, so I'm not going to do a big, long intro. I'm just going to get into it. So here's my conversation with creator of Darkwing Duck, Tad Stones.
Simi Valley, which is right next to the more famous San Fernando Valley in Southern California.
Oh, very nice. Beautiful.
So when you hear about Valley Girl, she's right over there a couple miles.
Excellent. Good movie. That's awesome. Cool. Well, how's the weather? Must be nice and blistering over there.
Actually, it just came down yesterday a bit to like 89, 90.
Nice.
We had a week of, at a certain point, you don't look at the numbers anymore. You just stay cowering inside, hoping your air conditioning doesn't go out.
I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada, and it's actually been quite warm here as well. Like just the humidity, because we're on the coast, it can get really high, and it's just so stifling when you go outside. In a few days, it's starting to come back down now, but it certainly is taking its sweet time. So
yeah, we used to vacation regularly in Arizona in August. Now, Central Arizona wasn't crazy, but the whole thing about dry heat, that does make a difference. Dry heat, you can deal with. Once that humidity starts crawling up, it's just miserable.
I don't know how Florida
even exists, really.
I felt that when I went to Vegas, because it was like such a dry, like it wasn't like it was warm, but like I totally get the appeal of that whenever I hear people talk about that, because when I was there I was like, oh yeah, this is like, it's warm, but I don't feel like I'm gonna, like I don't feel like there's a layer of goo on me 24/7.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which is very nice. Awesome, cool. Well, are you from California originally, or?
Yeah, I was literally born across the street from the Walt Disney Studios.
Oh wow, that's a sign if I ever heard one. Yeah,
yeah,
very cool. Were you obviously a fan growing up of
Oh yeah,
animation?
and my definitely. My dad had wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist, like an
Oh,
editorial cartoonist, but he had graduated right in the Depression, and it was more about finding a job to feed yourself as opposed to following your dreams. But what I inherited from him was just a lot of art books, but he had actually a lot of books on cartooning and some on animation. So I was always fascinated with that. And then he worked for the Carnation Company, which had a deal with Disneyland because they had a restaurant on Main Street.
mhm.
And So we had a yearly company picnic was at Disneyland. So I went regularly, and he bought me the Art of Animation book by Bob Thomas at a booth at Disneyland, and that told you the whole behind the scenes of not just animation basics, but like taking you through the process of making the animated feature with Sleeping Beauty. And a lot of the guys in those pictures that I got in the late 50s or whatever, I ended up working with years
Wow,
later.
that's amazing. So your dad was supportive, I assume, of you getting into a world in animation since it was kind of a something
Yeah,
he had wanted
exactly.
to do. Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that's
it was not necessarily an active support, but looking back on it, it's like when I was buying comic books, he didn't put now comic books were 12 cents most of
Mhm.
my collecting
Yeah,
career.
yeah.
Um, he didn't flinch, and I was never criticized for drawing or any of that. And in fact, the other thing that was fantastic was he worked in the marketing area
Mm.
of Carnation Company, specifically Friskies dog food. And they would put out, they'd have a promotion of whatever, to help sell to retailers and they would put out stationery. So it would have, I remember one that there was promotion to get an Indian headdress.
Hmm.
I don't know how many labels you had to send in or something like that. So that was the letterhead. Well, once that promotion was over, they had these literally reams of paper that he would bring home because the opposite side was pure white, great quality drawing paper. So I drew up with just never having to want for paper. Whereas my friend, when I started Disney, I started 5 months after Ron Clements. Now, Ron wrote and directed, along with John Musker, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, all these great movies. Um, Ron said, he would draw on the paper bags, the shopping bags, and every once in a while his mom would buy a little packet of typing paper. So he would had the opposite. It was like use every inch of the paper. I was totally spoiled when it came to that. It was like, no, I don't like that nose. I mean, try it
That's
again.
that's awesome. Yeah.
Uh,
I feel like every artist has some kind of a story like that early on. Like I think it was, I don't know where it was, an uncle or something gave me like I don't know where it was from, but it was almost like the rolls of paper they would use to like wrap up dishware or something at a store. I don't
huh.
know if they just had an
Like
extra
a
one somewhere.
newsprint roll or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it was clear. There's nothing on it, and it was
Yeah.
definitely more of a matte type material. But I don't know. I just had huge roll of it. I just rip off a massive sheet and draw all over it. So
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I've done a few little comics and stuff along the way,
Mhm.
but nothing too elaborate. But that's cool. Do you feel like? I guess did your dad have much regret? Do you know about not getting into that industry? If that was like a passion of
He
his growing
didn't.
up?
I got to say, my dad was not all that communicative, and that
Sounds like the
he
right
supported
generation. Yeah,
me. Yeah.
yeah.
And part of it, looking back, I knew he went to USC,
Hmm.
uh, and I knew he had worked on the newspaper, the Daily Trojan, it was called, uh, and he had to carve linoleum blocks
Oh wow.
to do the little editorial cartoon. And I've since found some of those online. Um, it was not conducive to working on your style,
Mm. Yeah,
right?
I'd say
Because you're
not.
carving
Yeah,
instead
yeah,
of
yeah.
drawing.
Yeah.
But then I found, and then in high school, I started uh, a series of humor newspapers. First, it was about, a ditto or mimeograph, um, homeroom paper that was just a humor thing, just a couple pages long. And then it got to, in my junior year, we actually, we got a photo offset. It was just like a sheet folded over.
Mhm.
But I got some of my friends to write stuff, and it was just an excuse for me to illustrate things. But I didn't realize because my career went into writing and drawing.
Mhm.
I had to write all this stuff to illustrate stuff. He, again, just supported, thought it was cool to, print out these things. Later on, I find out that he was on the editorial board of a humor magazine at University of Southern California.
Wow.
It's called Wampus. And it's like, yeah, I think that would have come up in conversation. And on eBay, I found a copy of the
Cool.
college humor paper where he did the illustration on the cover.
I was going to ask
And
if you ever got to find the work that you'd edited. That's really
yeah,
cool.
and then inside there was a couple gag cartoons and all that. And I was thinking like, well, I was a little better than that, wasn't I? And I look back on some of my stuff. Like, no, not really. It was just a whole different style. So.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, political cartooning and that sort of stuff is kind of a different, I wouldn't say it's like a widely different ball game, but I mean, because you're really starting to tap in whatever's going on in in the zeitgeist at the time, you kind of gotta, it's almost like a weird exercise in trying to be funny. Like the guys that do it every day, it's like you have to keep, going and stay on top of everything.
Well, and definitely, it has changed so much, and that this is back in the day when you'd have, Uncle Sam rolling up his sleeve and John English with his bulldog,
yeah.
And it's like they're giants waiting across the Atlantic, or or with something with a label of evil forces or Republican politicians, or so it was a whole different, using big symbols, and half the time they were labeled and things like that. So it was a whole different vibe for them. A lot of political cartoons you see today really are satirical, gag cartoons.
Right. I guess before it was, because I actually have a book I was just looking there of propaganda cartoons that someone gave me years ago. And I remember feeling like, yeah, I suppose it's almost like once there's not an external threat like war or whatever's going on, it becomes inward, because then it's just, and which is probably better, because then obviously you're not at war. But you just kind of get to poke fun at the you're like the court jester really poking fun at the king, which is kind of what those things should be, I guess, in peaceful times. So very cool. So I guess following along that path, like, did you go right into school for that after high school, like right into animation or into writing for animation?
No, what happened is when I was in high school, I really would have liked to have gone into animation, but my feeling was the only place worth working was Disney, because they did full animation. Now, at that time, animation was still being done in the United States, meaning literally people doing the drawings that ended up on screen, as opposed to shipping it overseas. Well, everybody else did very limited animation, because that's the only way to get it on television in the right time and for the right cost and all that. So my feeling was, well, Disney's the only place worth working, and they've got their guys, which actually was more or less accurate at that time. But as I went through high school and into college, Disney, they had put out Robin Hood, which made a decent amount of money for that time.
One of my favorites, though.
Yeah.
Always was.
Anyway, it was popular enough that the higher ups in the company said, well, what are you guys doing to train new generations? And the guys kind of went, what are you talking about? Because basically Roy Disney Sr. wanted to thought he could, they only needed to do like 7 features, and then they would just keep releasing them. And Walt said, no, we're going to do more stuff. And then when Walt started going toward Disneyland and animatronics and this whole new world instead of animation, and certainly live action movies, I was told that his feeling was, no, I started the company with these guys, let's keep it going, and basically until they die off. I get an image of a skeleton with a pencil trying to figure out all by himself,
chained to the desk, for eternity.
And when Walt died, the guys kind of felt like, well, that's it. We'll finish up. I guess it was Jungle Book at that time, and that'll probably be it. And instead, suddenly, in the late 60s and early 70s, they say, oh, we're going to start a training program, which was basically having a review board of a lot of those famous animators, plus Ken Anderson, a famous story guy, and layout men, Don Griffith and Claude Coates, or names you can look up in the old features and see their names all over it. And they would look at portfolios, people coming in, and say, "Oh, this guy looks like he has something," or "There's somebody." Everybody's, even if they're going to go into a different area, they still wanted them to know the basics of animation. So basically, you got accepted. And you had 4 weeks to do an animated test. And if you knew a little bit about animation, like I did, that was good, because otherwise you were trying to learn it at the same time as you're trying to do it. If you survived that first 4 weeks, you had a second 4 weeks. If you survive that, you go into production as like an in-betweener. And when you're working that way in a feature, you're learning as you're going, because you're part of the process. You see the drawings of the animator, and you're literally doing the drawings in between to make it move. But when
that's
when I first
ones and the fives, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, you have your, if you're going to throw a ball, here's your anticipation, and then there's your finish, and it's where you put the drawings in between that the animator would make a little start that you would slow in and slow out, meaning if you're going to throw, even if it's very fast, your hand is like, it doesn't go 100% immediately. It slows into, then moves fast, and then after it threw the ball, it would slow down. So you put more drawings there, maybe a couple in here. Anyway, I was terrible at in-betweening, almost got fired for it. So there would have done that career. Yeah.
I just kind of learned about that. It was something I was watching, and they were showing that like the head animator would do like the wind up or the start of the throw, the middle one where like it's at the biggest point of the action, and then the end one. And then the in-betweeners would do everything, all the cells in between. I guess it would be like 6 cells or whatever it was, or 7, whatever it was for the
it would depend on whether you're doing slow, like doing Bambi. He was driving people crazy because the deer would just like go madness in the forest, and it's like, that was a lot of drawings because it was just a slow movement, and then maybe a slow settle. Again, you're just going whereas if it's fast motion, you can go so fast that you actually, most of Disney animation was done on twos, meaning there was one drawing every 2 frames. It was very fast. You might have to do it on ones, because otherwise it would strobe. Your mind would pick up the stutter of, wait, it's not blurring in between.
That's very interesting. That idea of like how it's it's obviously about the animation, the art, and the communicating the story, but also in a way it's trying to figure out the exact science behind tricking the brain to register it as a
My favorite part of animation was always, I was terrible at flipping with my thumb, meaning it used to be when I first started, all your personal tests and when an animator did a scene, it'd be a pencil. They'd shoot it to find out if they would have notes or something before they do the finish. It was still done on film. So if you've got a scene, you tried to make sure every piece of information was in there, whether it was just roughly done or not, because you had to give it to the camera department. You wouldn't see it for a few days. So you were very stingy. Once it got to videos, people started getting lazy, where it's like, well, I'll see how that goes, and then I'll see how that goes, because they could just shoot it themselves. Before they had individual tapes or computers, you would, into shooting a test, you'd go through a reel that everybody was sharing the same videotape reel. That was literally the same piece of tape going through the machine. And you would look at the same scene over and over and over and go, what did the guy change? It was somebody else's work. And it was because, and then they're messing with a little eyebrow twinge or something. And the point was, you're fooling yourself. Whatever you're working on has no impact on the scene, because here's an objective viewer seeing it, and it looks like the same thing over and over again. They're
not paying attention to the eyebrow or whatever.
Exactly. So because before you sent it out, you were constantly flipping it, like get the feeling, you would have a stack of papers and you'd do this
Oh yeah, yeah.
to get the movement, and you would ask your friends down the hall and say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And I don't know whether it was the flatness of my thumbs or whatever, but I was always bad at that part. But what I loved in animation is while you're working on it, you would put several sheets on your animation table, and your fingers would be in between each sheet.
Mhm.
It's been a long time since I've done this sort of thing. So you're flipping it like that, and you learn to flip in different orders of your fingers because of where you're drawing it. So you put your extremes down there, and then you're flipping constantly, and then you would, and I'm sure I can't do this anymore, you would actually be able to flip from the back one to the front one to the middle one.
Oh
how
yeah,
you
yeah.
moved your fingers.
Oh,
But
cool.
the magic of that to me was, when you talk about drawings coming to life, it was like that, in that, you know, you just made a drawing and then you're flipping it and it's moving, you know. In fact, once I did a practical joke on that paid off much better than I expected. Andy Gaskell was a fantastic animator who then went into art direction and didn't do that much animation. He went out to lunch and he had it was a shot on the rescuers of Bianca Mouse, you know, this cute mouse, and she was just like turning toward camera. So that was the drawings left on his desk when he went to lunch. And I put a drawing in the middle of this basically horrific face. So she basically turned, and right there in the middle was this, you know,
Yeah.
He sat down and he just put his fingers in there and flipped it. And it was like this creature came to life. He literally flew back from the desk.
That's awesome. I think you might have stumbled on a cool horror movie concept there. That's really fun.
Yeah, so it was like that paid off. But
well, it's funny because like,
it's like how real it seemed when you know, it just couldn't have been better that he didn't see it ahead of time. It just flipped it.
That's amazing.
Leapt out at him.
That's super cool. I talked to Gary K. Wolf on here a while ago, who had written the Who Framed Roger Rabbit book that the movie was based on, and we had a long discussion about some of the jokes in the margins that animators would do, just because there's all these legends about different ones hidden in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and you know, it's interesting about that whole part of like, you know, working on something so tedious for so long, you would assume, you know, the animators got to keep themselves sort of entertained and do little jokes and things like that they thought the public would never know about. You know, that sort of came back later. So that's very cool, very fun. So did you start working on The Rescuers? I just was kind of skimming through some of your work.
I mean, I actually have an animated scene in The Rescuers. My only animated scene in a Disney feature. Back then, that was before you had credits that went on for 8 minutes. It was just 6 to 8 title cards with a few names on them, you know, and some of that was the actors and all that. And so and you had footage requirements to get on that. And in story, it was really up to the whims of the director. And I did a lot of my story on Fox and Hound for Wooly Reitherman. And then they switched directors, and I was actually moved over to what is now Imagineering to work on Epcot. I remember being called back to say, you know, okay, we're just letting you know you're not getting credit. And I was fine because I knew how the things worked. But then the manager went on to talk about, yeah, it's looking good. I really like the sequence where, you know, the hunter's showing Copper how he's setting traps. And I said, yeah, it's my sequence. You know, that's what I did. So that was, you know, all right. And then I found out they gave a credit to an imaginary character, that there was a little worm or caterpillar that they called Squeaks, I think. And they thought it was funny to have in the credits Squeaks as himself. And I'm thinking,
you can't get a credit
to an imaginary person, and here's somebody who did work on the film, and you can't spare that little frame of film, you know, or whatever.
I credit that movie as being probably the one that one of the first. I don't know what young I would have been when that movie came out. Probably pretty young, But it was probably one of the first movies that I may have cried at as a young kid. It was like, like when you first realize how like that there's such a deep sadness to and such a real world thing in that movie that I don't think people really registered. As you get older, it certainly appeals to you on a much different level, but the ideas of those early connections and how life sort of sends you different ways. It was such a wonderful story.
Yeah.
And it was really, really cool. That's awesome. So what did you do when you were working on Epcot? Was it just sort of developing?
I did. I went over and worked. Well, the cool thing, well, it was many cool things. I went over and they were trying to figure out where I'd be placed. I was just kind of getting the feeling of the place. I forget the first little project, but then I ended up on the transportation pavilion sharing a room with Ward Kimball, who was one of the 9 old men of Disney, the guy who did Jiminy Cricket, and Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and just all sorts of hilarious stuff. Created the Firehouse Five. Anyway, so Ward and I worked in the same room, and that was like working with a time machine because he recalled stuff. We were doing the history of transportation, and when we got to a certain age, it was still some horse-drawn carriages, just the early days of the gasoline-powered car. He remembered that stuff. And he told me, he said, "Oh yeah, this is how the rope would wind around, and this guy would have this kind of thing. The ice truck would have these big calipers to pick up blocks of ice." And I wish I had, taken notes and had a diary of that time. But I had a young son at the time, and it was more about racing home to play with him than, "Excuse me, son, I have to write down history here."
I'm learning about gimbals. Goddammit, just leave me here.
And then I worked briefly on the Space Pavilion, which you'll notice doesn't exist, because basically there was no. Disney went in with the idea. Disneyland was broken up into lands made of several different little rides. And a lot of times those separate rides have a sponsor of some type to help finance the park. And when they went to do Epcot, which had these big pavilions, instead of saying, "Here's a big pavilion that's like a land and we can divide up the different stuff," they wanted a company to sponsor each pavilion, which immediately wiped out all sorts of potential sponsors because they weren't big enough to say, "Oh, we're going to spend," I think it was $35 million again in late 70s.
Huge money.
Which is like, we have that to throw away on just kind of goodwill advertising. Anyway, there was no space company that was going to bankroll a pavilion like that. But I did get to meet George Lucas, in that, and who later called DuckTales like the Star Wars of television because of the effect it had on syndication market back then. And then after that, I worked on after that, I worked on the Imagination Pavilion with Barry Braverman and Tony Baxter. And Tony is literally an official Disney legend as far as one of the key ride designers, watching over Disneyland, Disney World, and created Thunder Mountain. And so that was fun learning all about that. That was the first version of the Imagination Pavilion, the character of Figment and Dreamfinder. And they tried to get rid of Figment, and everybody complained, so they ended up bringing him back. So.
I like learning about some of the, because Disney always has this sort of. I've been to Disney World. It always has this sort of it's magic. I mean, they do a very good job of promoting that, and also suspending your disbelief and making you truly believe you're in kind of a magical place. And I remember a show I listened to one time about marketing talked about how Disney was the best as far as customer service goes in the world. I think if you called them up and had a question that had nothing to do with Disney, they would still try to help you. If it was how do I get my best flight, but the cheapest flight between the Philippines and somewhere else, they actually would still try to help you, even though it had nothing to do with what they did. They're kind of a gold standard when it comes to that sort of stuff. But just learning about the back end of it's kind of cool. I spoke with a gentleman on the show one time that had done all of the helicopter photography for all of those flyovers of all the countries. Jeff, I think his name was. It'll kind of be in a minute, but And like just learning the back end of all those things. Like I've gone to those pavilions and watched those flyovers of like China and of all these other things.
Yeah.
And just sort of to sit there and hear how all that came about and all the back end of it was very interesting and very cool. That's very neat. Jeff Blythe was his name. Yeah, he was very cool. He worked on The Shining as well. He was the guy that did all the following the car around the mountain at the beginning of The Shining.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of became like the resident helicopter photography guy, obviously before drones were a thing. And he was pretty active doing all that. But no, that's super neat. So I mean, you're a big part of Chippendale Rescue Rangers as well, right? Which
Oh yeah, that was my job. I created the show with Jim Magon, the two of us, but we were like the two unofficial creative leads at TV animation at the time. And basically, our boss said, "I can't put both of you on the same show because usually it's like one has to help in development, whether it's for their own show or some other new show, and while the other's doing a show." So I was on it. With that. So it started that way. I wrote the Bible, Jim gave notes on it, and then had a miserable production schedule where I was working 7 days a week. And my day off was Sunday when I only went into the office for 4 hours. So
wow,
never want to repeat that again.
I'd say not. I talked with on the X-Men, the other X-Men podcast we did. We talked with Julia Leewald, and
Julia was on Rescue Rangers.
Yeah, and she spoke very fondly of it. I think the box set had just come out. I don't know if it's there in Canada, like the whole set. And we were talking about it, and she was like, "I didn't even know that was out yet." And she was like, "I had to get one of those." So yeah, it's cool. And obviously, I saw you had something to do with the remake they did recently. I guess I don't know if you can call it remake. Tangential.
No, the only thing that happened with the Chippendales Rescue Rangers movie. When the trailer came out, I thought it was hilarious. And there were fans that saying, "How can they do this? This is, sacrilege and all that." And it's like, this is the way creativity works.
Yeah.
You're inspired by the same thing. It has nothing to do with all those episodes and the adventures. They just said the conceit, what if this is the behind the scenes, kind of the Roger Rabbit behind the scenes to what you saw on film. And I just thought it looked super funny and defended it. And because that caught the attention of the filmmakers, because obviously as a creator of the show, or
sure,
not that it would have come to something other than Disney saying, "Can we take away his pension? Is there a way?" Anyway, I ended up talking to the director, and they had me basically play myself in the movie, in that there's a scene where a producer offers the guys a TV show, and that's my voice offering them the show. So in essence, I'm the guy creating the Rescue Rangers and saying, "I want you two to work on it."
That's awesome.
So that was fun. I think my name is on the cargo ship. It's my name and my partner's name, Alan Zaslov, is I think on the stern of the ship is Zaslav Stones or Stone Zaslav or something. But
that's awesome.
That's for all the people. That's for the freeze frame folks.
That's it's funny that sort of world of the people that complain about that sort of stuff. Like, this isn't the thing I remember from my childhood. Go ahead.
I understand that sort of thing, in that really those fans, what they really want is the show they loved as a kid, unchanged, just better quality, more episodes. That's all they want. But from a business point of view, there's got to be a reason to do that. Otherwise, why not just rerun the old stuff? Now, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they were such a huge merchandising hit that they never needed a creative excuse, because any new set of Turtles was like, we're going to sell, a crap ton of toys. And they kept doing that. But Point Grey Pictures did the last movie where they actually, it was one of those things that was staring you right in the face. It's like, what if they really were teenagers? And so Mutant Mayhem featured not just superheroes who like pizza a lot and said cowabunga. It was like, no, we're giving them teenager personalities. They're smart and dumb, and just like regular kids in over their heads. And it was a brilliant movie. I thought it was fantastic. And they're doing now a 2D show coming out soon on one of the channels. But
Yeah.
that was a case of a creative reboot that really made an effort. So
It actually
you know,
dumps them in high school too at the end, which is
yeah,
like seeing them go to high school is like something I don't think they've ever done in any of the ones before as well.
no, I don't think so.
But yeah,
So
let's
it is that sort of thing that you, if you're going to bring something back, and hence the Rescue Rangers movie was a whole different pitch than, oh, let's do more episodes of the show.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because I watched like I once heard a comedian, I think it was Brian Posehn, say this, where he said like, it's more like when people defend those sort of things, it's more like I don't like the Ninja Turtles that do this. I liked it better when like Vanilla Ice was there and mom and dad were still married. Like it's more about getting back to the point in your past when you perceive that you were the happiest.
Exactly. There's projects I've worked on that I thought like, oh, this did not come out well, and then for a certain generation,
Yeah.
oh, I used to watch that over and over and over again. Okay, you're not an axe murderer or anything, are you? I hope not.
Yeah, I sharpen my axe to this every day.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's very cool. But yeah, just
Yeah,
this
to me,
sort
that's
of
just that's part of fandom.
yeah.
It's like the debating and the arguing and all that, and the fan fiction, of
I
which
just
there's a ton, even
oh
G-rated.
yeah, that's good.
That is just. I always wonder, like, gee, why don't you put that creativity into your own characters?
Yeah.
And and some eventually do. But again, it's just more like a hobby. It's like, no, I love these characters. I love putting them in situations, and it's like they're now part of that creative process, and I can understand it if you did do more episodes. They're saying like, wait, you didn't do what I thought of.
Well, it's also trying to appeal to not just like you think about if you're just trying to appeal to nostalgia specifically, like you're like we just need to entertain the people that love Chip and Dale the first time. Then I highly doubt that because most people. I mean, for most people, they watch these things when they're kids and they go on to their lives and they never think about them again. So the people like nerds that really are into it, I don't know if that's a big enough contingency to warrant the amount of money spent on these projects to get it back. So at least doing something different, or at least making it adult, is appealing to the adult side of them who are now adults and are going to get to enjoy the adult humor side of this, right?
Yeah, it is definitely, you have to make it for today's audience.
Yeah,
and you've got to at least have the potential of it being, like you say, a big enough audience to warrant spending all that money.
That's not for kids anymore. It's for us, the people that watched it when we were kids. Like the new X-Men cartoon, it's not for kids now. Exactly, it's for us. It's for us that watched it growing up.
Yeah, and yet those you can still share it with your kids,
exactly,
kind of thing. I mean, to me, that is it's neat to see. I mean, I've been called in to talk about various times they want to take a project of mine and talk about redoing and all that. And I always take the position of, there was a script writing book, and I forget who the guy was quoting, but basically, if you want, the basic idea was, if you have a flower and you want to grow another flower, you generally don't hack off the flower and stick it in the dirt. You get the seed of it and you put the seed in the dirt, and it grows to a very similar but different flower.
That's a good way to put it.
That's how I think of, if you're going to do a reboot of Darkwing Duck, here's the basic show. I don't expect it to be the old show, because we have the old show. DuckTales 2017, when they did the new version of DuckTales, which I thought was brilliant, they introduced their version of Darkwing, and they had this brilliant, because I had never shown an origin of Darkwing, and they kind of didn't in that they had this fan of an old Darkwing Duck show, which never had an origin explained, but that show inspired the guy to become that
real world Darkwing.
That was Jim Starlin, who was the actor in that show. But the fan was Drake Mallard, which is my Darkwing. And he's inspired to become the new Darkwing, or a real version of him as opposed to a TV show version.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to do that.
Yeah. So it didn't go forward. They had a whole pitch to then do a Darkwing Duck series, but management changed at Disney and within the area, and they looked at, well, how much DuckTales make, or how successful was it? Is this a spinoff, or should we put our money into other stuff? And so they didn't get to go ahead with that version.
Yeah, I was disappointed to hear that. I always loved the superhero world of the DuckTales universe.
Yeah.
I was a huge Darkwing fan. I loved Gizmo Duck. I loved all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But where did so you were? I mean, you were the creator of Darkwing Duck essentially, and that
Yeah.
series. What was the impetus for that? Did Disney just come and say DuckTales is doing well, we want another Duck theme show, or is it like something
Kind
else?
of, in a
Yeah.
way, no. It was Jeffrey Katzenberg who
Oh
later,
wow.
formed
Yeah.
DreamWorks and all that, but Jeffrey was running, TV and movies. Um, Jeffrey said, "I want a show called Double O Duck." There had been an episode of DuckTales which featured Launchpad as a James Bond parody, and Jeffrey felt like um, a clever name, and Michael Eisner shared this idea. If there was an intriguing name or what they thought was a clever name, that would bring a bigger audience to check it out. If hopefully somebody says, "Well, that sounds funny," it was up to you to do a great show that would keep those people checked it out. But that was basically the idea behind it. So it wasn't about any of the particulars of the episode. In fact, he said, no, it cannot be Launchpad and the Quack. The whole point is to create a new character called Double O Duck. So the first attempt was like a spy parody. I didn't really believe in it. And it turned out Jeffrey didn't either. Jeffrey said it needed Disney heart, and it can't just be the kind of spy parody we've seen a million times before. And we tried different things, and we had a Launchpad and added in Gizmo Duck for a while, and we were thinking to contain in this stuff. Luckily, he told me to do it over, as opposed to saying, "I'll get somebody else to do it." And in some of the artwork that had been generated was a generic duck, like a Donald practically, in a white tuxedo with a mask, hat, and a cape. And the reason for the mask was what really started the development, getting interest in it to give it heart, was the idea that what if he was raising a daughter? So that would provide complications to obviously the adventures he was going to have. Hence, you wouldn't normally see, if you were going to have James Bond pretend to be somebody else, he would just have fake IDs, different passport. You wouldn't have to wear a mask. Anyway, but somehow with the kids and having a daughter and having to move into a neighborhood, he needed literally that kind of secret identity feel. Anyway, called in a bunch of the guys that I wanted to work with on the show, because at the time, writers and story editors were on term contracts, meaning Disney would say, "We're hiring you for 3 years with an option for 2 years," as opposed to, "We're hiring you to do this show called Rescue Rangers."
Right.
Because of that, they basically owned all your ideas that happened in those 5 years. But it also meant you could call people in to help out on a project, just to brainstorm or whatever. Well, I called in a bunch of the guys who I wanted to work on the show. And one, Dwayne Capizzi, I believe he's doing a Transformers show now, or has just finished one. Also did Jackie Chan Adventures and Men in Black. And way back when Alf he did before he did Disney. Anyway, Dwayne was in the room, and he looked at this guy in a tuxedo with the mask and the hat, and he said, "This looks more like a pulp hero, like the Shadow or Green Hornet." And that was a clicking point for me, in that that's a whole different template we can do. That instead of spy tropes, it's, excuse me.
No, it's okay. No worries.
Good. I guess my wife picked it. Anyway, it was different tropes in that Doc Savage, and I knew of this stuff. I was, as old as I am, I'm not that old, but I knew about old radio shows, and I'd heard tapes of them and read some of the pulp stories that were done of them. Doc Savage had a group of characters. His team was made up of experts, and they were all very quirky guys. There was a chemical engineer, I'm probably mixing these up, but like a chemical engineer who kind of looked like an ape, and there was this prissy Englishman, and they were constantly quibbling, but it's like they would kill for each other. A communications expert and all that. And I said, "Oh, that's different than Q and Moneypenny and whatever."
And visually more interesting, then you get to have some fun with that.
Yeah. But the problem was, at least where we were thinking at the time, was kind of those characters, unless you brought them all along or brought them on in bits and pieces, they're mostly at headquarters, so you don't even get to the mission yet. And there was just too many characters that when you're doing a show, if you have a big team, you can't give everybody a line. I mean, suddenly if you're trying to do any personality stuff, all that, literally the 22 minutes you have to fill has to be divided up in all these characters. And well, that guy's just along, but he's not going to talk. And we had Zipper on Rescue Rangers, who was precisely that. Yeah. Anyway, we kept paring it down until finally we hit on just a trio of Launchpad Launchpad 00 Duck and his daughter Goslin. We sold the show, went out to Jeffrey anyway, and to Michael. Then went out to sell it to syndicators. Disney took out a double-page spread in the trade papers, and the people who actually owned the James Bond rights said, "No, 00 is not a thing. It's Ian Fleming's invention, and we own it. You can't have it." And they, almost every animated show and many sitcoms had done their James Bond episodes. Their and they threw around the 00 tropes. That didn't bother. It was the idea that Disney is
the title is
basically doing the huge campaign to get this while they're trying to re-energize the Bond franchise. So they were not pleased with that.
Fair enough.
So we suddenly needed a new name. We had a contest to come up with the name, and Alan Burnett came up with Darkwing, and every other name was trash. It wasn't even like Alan's like in the top 5. I like this one the best. Let's vote. It was like, no, it was that name and nothing. And I said, Darkwing is the name he thinks he is, because it sounds so cool. I'm going to put Duck with it because that now makes it a little sillier, which is closer to the reality. Alan, of course, aside from doing a little development on a possible Darkwing movie with other writers, he went to Warner Brothers and did the animated adventures of Batman, with Bruce Timm and all that. So our old joke is we warmed Alan up for the Dark Knight with the Duck Knight.
Which is parodied all the time. Like there's lots of covers of the Darkwing Duck comics that parody like the Dark Knight Returns and all those sort of things. Those covers with the lightning behind him where he's doing the jump and it's funny. It's funny how that stuff parodies itself around. But I know there's always been comparisons about Batman because he's had the family and stuff to Darkwing Duck, but I've always felt the pulp heroes, the gun that shoots smoke, the big cape, the hat, like his
shadow.
Yeah.
Well, just the whole idea of I knew the weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? And so I specifically came up with 2 things. One was Darkwing having this thing that he always said, which was, "I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the scourge, the winged scourge that pecks at your nightmares. I am Darkwing Duck." He was going to say that every time. The other thing he was going to say every episode was, "Let's get dangerous." And that was before that they put it in the theme song. So in all our episodes, I think there was only like 3 where he doesn't say that. However, luckily, like the 3rd script in, or very early anyway, we had a show called, I think it was the episode called 00 Ducks. No, it couldn't have been double. It was Double Darkwings, something like that. Anyway, the premise was, for some reason, Launchpad had to masquerade as Darkwing Duck, and he could never get that saying right. He'd say, "I am the terror that flaps in the night." Then he'd say, "I am the road salt that rusts the underside of your car. I'm the bubble gum that sticks on the shoe." And when I read that script, I said, "This is too funny to leave into one episode. We have to give this to Darkwing." So I told everybody who had a finished script, go back and change that beat. And we were recording every week, so picking up new lines was not a problem. So that's obviously one of the most famous things, the show, or Darkwing as a character, is connected to. And that was part of me being willing to be super flexible and not, even in a bigger way, because that was behind the scenes and it was no big deal to go back and change scripts and not worry about that. Well, here's an episode where Launchpad has got his own goofy phrases. We just let that slide. The bigger example of that was we did an episode where Darkwing was struck by a ray that split him into a good version and a bad version. Mm-hmm. We called Posiduck and Negaduck. And we weren't sure. Jim Cummings, who did the voice, we're saying, is he going to be able to make them different enough? And the production wise, when you're sending a storyboard of two ducks that look exactly the same overseas, they did mix up some of them, but most of those I think we caught. Anyway, I loved what Jim did with Negaduck. And when we got that done after the recording, I said, okay, I told the story editors, I love the character Negaduck. Let's use him more. You know, he's a great, evil counterpart to Darkwing. And the guy said, well, how? It's going to be the same story every time that he gets hit by the same ray, or do we have to come up with different ways of splitting him? I said, no. Nobody likes Posiduck. I don't like Posiduck. I like Negaduck. Just bring him back. And they asked, I grew up in the Silver Age of comics when there was very little continuity. Yeah. They asked, how do we explain that? And I said, you don't.
He's just there now.
Do it.
Yeah.
Nobody ever explained to me that how Batman constantly captured the Joker and the Riddler and the Mad Hatter and Penguin and threw them in jail or Arkham. And they were always out, to fight in another issue. And it wasn't like those issues started with the escape from Arkham or something like that. It was just like, no, it's the villain. You're telling the story of the same villains over and over.
Yeah.
And that's, fans have since come up with, weird, twisty theories on how it's all one universe and all that. Yeah. But it was again, seeing something that this is too good just to leave here in one episode, instead of sitting around and saying, oh, remember that episode? It's like, no, use this guy. Yeah. And that also shows my Silver Age background too, because the reason why Negaduck has those colors is those were the colors of Professor Zoom, the evil Flash, which to my head was always the evil counterpart, was always two things. The Star Trek guys with goatees, their evil universe, or it was the evil Flash. And so that's why he's yellow, black, and red.
That is awesome.
Totally of that.
That makes sense. I always kind of wondered that. I thought it was just sort of inverting the colors of Darkwing, but I never
people do that when you invert them. It's nothing.
It's not. It wouldn't be the same to that. No, I never thought about it that way. I just assumed that. You mentioned you had like a young child when you were working. Was Gosling sort of a reflection of that, or was it just you wanted to have
at that
a
point,
kid?
That was my daughter. I have 3 kids, and she was my youngest, and she was thankfully did not turn out like Gosling, but she had a lot of energy running around, as a toddler, and it was easy that, and I love Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh yeah.
So it was basically those two influences, Calvin and my daughter, that grew to be Gosling. And it was very important to me that, look, I want Gosling to be an out and out comedic character too. They drive each other crazy. It's built into the show that he basically orders her to stay home and she refuses. But it's, they still have to be likable, and we have to say they love each other. So I want them to hug all the time, and I want them to say they love each other. And that turned out, unbeknownst to me, when I retired and was a guest at various comic conventions, I had people come up, women notably, who got a little teary-eyed because it meant so much to them, because they had evidently a very rough childhood because of their fathers or lack of fathers or whatever. And that was like an emotional anchor to them. So you never know how your work is going to affect others.
I always dug that about the character as well, and especially don't gonna make this all about Darkwing, but the Dark Warrior Duck character, and when they show the dark future where she dies and he becomes essentially an authoritarian monster, just with ruling over the city and having a very heavy hand with the way he deals out justice and becoming a much different character. I always thought that was like such a dark story to walk down for a seemingly, kids show, but the show made a lot of turns like that. And I really dug that. And I thought it was keen to showing how important she was to keeping him the goofy, fun version of him he was.
I think that was based on some, I don't even know if it was in a comic or a conversation with a comic artist or a writer, that the notion that Robin was important to Batman.
Mm.
So somebody outside, it wasn't that Batman ever said this, but somebody else said, and I couldn't tell you where it came from, but my memory is it was outside of me, that it was something connected to Batman needing that Robin to keep him from going too far. And that stuck with me, and just created that show to say, no, let's ultimately do it with, you know, Darkwing Duck, that she didn't die. She just disappeared from his life.
Right. Yes.
She traveled into the future.
Right.
And I always played around with time travel stuff. Never. And it's like, yeah, you drive yourself crazy with time travel stuff, saying, well, if she never went, that he wouldn't feel this way, that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to pick a lane and stay in it. Otherwise it gets really complicated really fast.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. I did want to briefly touch on, because I honestly think, and I'm not just pandering because you're on the show. I always was a massive fan of the Aladdin straight to DVD sequels. Return of Jafar and Prince, specifically King of Thieves, were fantastic.
Yeah.
And I love the show too. I watched that as much as I could growing up. Because I didn't have cable. Like, I grew up in a kind of very rural area. So when I could, like, go visit my grandmother or something and watch some of the stuff, I catch up on it. But those are fantastic films, and I don't think they're appreciated for how good they were.
Return of Jafar is actually the one that I was talking about, because it was basically divided up episodes, and I pitched to home video. I said, well, because we always showed those multiple part ones to introduce the series as a movie. So if it was going to be on Monday through Friday, that multi-parter would be played vertically, meaning as one vertical strip on Friday nights to introduce the show. So it played as a movie, and I had met some people at home video, and I said, are you interested? I'm technically doing the sequel to Aladdin. And they were not interested at the time. However, when they released Aladdin on video and it made so much money, I talked to the same guy again, and he ran it up the flagpole. And this time they were very interested. Jeffrey Katzenberg looked at it, and luckily the opening sequence was, we had two studios. We had a Disney studio in Tokyo and one in Australia, which was very small, but they were so good and really had a Western sensibility. Really paid off in Darkwing. I wish we had more episodes by them for Darkwing. But they did like the first half, and then Japan studio did the second half. Luckily, they did this opening of these horses going across the desert, and we used the song from the movie, but the verses that fit our show more. So they weren't necessarily the same verses as you hear in the movie. And between that and the music and the great animation, Jeffrey was astounded. He said, guys, it's because, he's closely involved in the making of the feature. This is looking pretty good. Nowhere near feature quality, but really close. Jeffrey knew how cheap it was to do. For me, and he said, we're going to put this on a home video. Or yes, he agreed to it. It can't be at the same price point. He had all these technical reasons. And he said, I want it finished up like an 8 picture. So I got to work with like the Academy Award winning sound design team from Twister. I got to work, sit in the mixing theater at the Disney studios with the guys who mixed all the features, and learned so much that I could apply to all my own shows as far as mixing sound effects and things.
That's awesome.
Anyway, that was one where I still kind of to cringe at, but I've learned to not talk about it because of people like you, who's like, no, I grew up with that. That's great.
Yeah.
And it's, again, the original Aladdin was done by friends of mine. I used to share an office with Warren Clements. And I checked with those guys before I did the show to say, are you guys okay with this? I don't know if they had said no. I don't know what I would have done. Probably not at a job. Anyway,
I have the Blu-ray somewhere that has 2 and 3 on it. I was trying to find it. But it's
that was it. People talk about the 3 Aladdin movies. I'm going, what? Because to me, there's one Aladdin movie, and then there's the 2 things I did. And I go, oh, those are movies too. Yeah. But King of Thieves was a little different. It was like we knew that it was just that story, and I felt better about really trying. We tried to color key it, actually make sense story-wise. Certain colors represented certain things, and characters will shift the color of their costume as they turn bad or good or whatever, or the lighting will change on the villain. And we had some great songs and some great actors, doing all of that. So, and Robin Williams came back for the second.
Right. Yeah. I was always amazed by that because, it was a different, you'd think when it's straight to DVD, having Robin Williams on there, I imagine that must blow up your budget. But Aladdin was such a big hit. How come they never just the impetus to make his direct sequel for film, like theaters, was that never on the table?
No, because it had never been done before.
So,
and the idea of it had been done in a small way in that there was a Little Mermaid Saturday morning series that they did.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was very successful. And I was super self-conscious about this because, again, this was done by friends. I used to be in feature animation.
Yeah.
It was just, worlds difference in the quality of literally the movement going on. I mean, the Australian stuff could easily be, if you directed it enough, and not that I did because we were still on a very small budget,
right.
But you could, working with those same animators, you could give enough notes that it would definitely be feature quality. That's how good they were, and their sensibilities were along those lines.
I guess I never thought about that.
Thieves, King of Thieves was just a little different way of working. In fact, I remember when he finally, Aladdin's father he has the hand of Midas, and he touches the temple, basically the whole place turns gold. I had a timing director who was timing it out, but then I put the theme from Jurassic Park over that just to make it more majestic, and the timing director saw that and he said, "Oh, I gave it more time, but not like that, because that was a feature thing." It's like, no, this is a moment we've talked about through the whole thing. This is the display of its power. It's got to play majestic. So we had time to do that sort of thing. But we didn't even do story reels, until then, timing things out.
Yeah, I was always amazed by that one. I love the concept of the Hand of Midas was such a unique sort of take on that old myth. I thought it was very cool. Those things, like it's one of those things that I think are both those movies on Disney Plus? I feel like they're not.
I don't know. Disney Plus is odd. I assume certain things are on, and then it turns out they're not.
Yeah, I don't think the Aladdin cartoon is on it either.
Star Command is I don't know if that'll ever be on.
Really,
is a favorite of lots of people. When it started, I always thought, oh, they're going to cycle some of these things through, but who knows? Who knows what the behind the scenes are?
Okay, so the movies are on there. The one thing that's not on there that I was always amazed of is the cartoon. It's not on Disney Plus. Not in Canada anyway, maybe in the States, but
really?
Yeah, they don't have the original cartoon because I wanted to go back and revisit it because I liked a lot of elements of that. I thought like all the storylines with the king having the giant suit of armor, all that stuff. That was kind of a golem story. I liked all that sort of stuff, and I want to kind of go back and revisit it, but it's not. I mean, I guess I could find it somewhere.
Well, that's where I feel. Yeah, that's where I feel like I don't know that online petitions have much impact, but a lot of individual people making it known that, hey, I'd really like it. Why don't we have this? I want to share this with my kids or whatever. There's enough people talking about it. It's like, eventually you would think, oh yeah, here's programming that, shouldn't cost them too much.
You would just think, right? I mean, just scan and throw it on there, but maybe there's an impetus to try to make it as like to rescan it and make it as high quality as they can. And that takes
maybe so that exactly. So, maybe it is something like that. Buzz Lightyear, even though it has openings by Pixar, it was not a favorite of John Lasseter. But John Lasseter is no longer with the company. And so it's like, I was trying to figure, did John leave before or after it was on Disney Plus? I don't know. So maybe I was thinking maybe that's the reason why, and sometimes things just get in this automatic bin. There's when we originally did Darkly Dawns the Duck, which is the Darkwing two-parter, because it was going to play in that as a movie on the Friday night, that had a slightly different time slot. And I said, well, we're not going to play the theme song twice. So let's do this minute opening using the theme song that was brilliantly animated and a perfect example of how Darkwing could be the cartoon comedian and a hero at the same time, just as he's chasing these villains and he ends up with them tied up in a police station. That was exactly the minute. So it was brilliant. It was cut out. I wish I had constantly shown that to my crew to remind them of, how broad it is to be. But then when it went into syndication, as designed, they cut that out so that the regular title sequence could run in. And there was something else that was cut out to make the time. And then when they put it on DVD, they just used the television version. Nobody went back, even in the world of DVD extras, when the DVD was like, oh no, I want the director's cut, I want the commentary on all that. DVDs used to be little mini film schools. Anyway, that would have been a perfect thing to reestablish, but because they just automatically, it was like some guy, here it is, the rack of stuff, let's put it in this machine and grind it through. Anyway, it was never seen. I mean, I think you can find it on YouTube if you search around for the original opening of Darkwing or whatever. And it's a brilliant little piece, but it's that kind of automatic thing. So sometimes I think, like there's an episode of Darkwing that played on ABC called Hot Spells, and it used the literary conceit of a character making a deal with the devil. I think Gosling did. And because it played once, and because ABC got complaints from the Bible Belt, they didn't play it anymore. And then that was like, somehow that got tagged that way. So when it plays on Disney Plus, that episode isn't on there either. Where especially nowadays, it would be like no big deal. I mean, it was like Devil and Daniel Webster, guys. It's just like Faust. It's about the devil.
It happens in everything. Like there's Spider-Man comics that are based around the idea that he makes a deal with the devil. Like it's
exactly.
It's very specific.
The whole reboot.
Yeah.
As a decision was made by a different company 30 years ago, it's having repercussions today because nobody bothers to check. Nobody, unless you get to the point, and this actually, I was told this once, that somebody said, this is years ago, I met a person at San Diego Comic-Con I was talking to somebody, and then this other guy was saying, I work at Disney in licensing or whatever. And he said, as basically the kids who grew up with the Disney afternoon age up and climb the ladders to get into middle management, he says, you're going to see more stuff. So there's this whole fan base working in Disney, and they move up, and suddenly you were starting to see, little vinyl versions of the characters and licenses to different people, and suddenly those characters come out again. And why you see a bunch of Darkwing stuff, you see a bunch of Rescue Ranger stuff, you don't see Tailspin stuff, or Bonkers for that matter.
But I thought about that. Tailspin and Bonkers were great.
Things,
Marsupilami, like all those things I used to watch when I was a kid. Like I have a reference for that stuff. There seems to be nothing of it, so that's out there. And that's very cool. I mean, in the world of like all of that's why I was kind of wanted to travel a little bit about those Aladdin sequels, is because there's so many of those. Like there's a bunch of Lion King sequels, like that were straight to DVD, and then series and stuff, and then the Timon and Pumbaa series. Like there's a lot of extended, like as someone who's kind of a continuity guy like me, there's like a whole world that a lot of people miss that's out there that continues on the stories in their own little ways. It makes them very interesting.
Yeah. I think the quality of the direct-to-videos, because they were making so much money for a time. You got to realize when Return to Jafar came out, Disney, ever since Michael Eisner took it over at that time, was growing by leaps and bounds, profit-wise too. And it was mostly just doing common sense things like, no, we're going to put your movies on this thing called VHS. That kind of basic decision that every other studio is doing. Just a lot of, instead of turning out 3 movies a year, we're actually going to be a movie studio and turn out a dozen movies a year. Animation, instead of coming out every 5 years, let's have a new movie every year. Can we do that? What do we have to change about the department? How do we have to hire? How do we have to train? Anyway, and maybe this is apocryphal, but this is what I was told. A lot of executives had bonuses tied to the profits of the company. That if it grew by this percentage, they get a bonus. What I was told is that they were about to have the quarter or the year, whatever, where, okay, we grew, we're certainly successful, but we didn't make the amount to get a bonus. Nobody expected a bonus. And out of nowhere, Return of Jafar comes in and makes something close to $200 million domestic.
Wow.
And it costs like $3.5 million, something like that. It was like suddenly they all got bonuses. And what was this about?
Yeah.
Suddenly. And I know, meanwhile, and I understand it, Peter Schneider was in charge of feature animation. And almost, again, I was told by somebody else, every time there was a meeting that included features and TV, somewhere the conversation would go to Peter saying how TV animation shouldn't exist because it's hurting the Disney name and animation and all that. And he had certainly made that argument about Return of Jafar, to the point where, again, I was not at this meeting. Evidently, Michael Eisner said, should we be doing these? Should this, does this hurt the Disney name or whatever? And they said, well, it would cost this much to make, and this is how much it's made. So how many more of these do you have in mind?
Yeah.
Because as I always quote Lily Tomlin, one of her characters used to say, nobody calls it show art.
Yeah.
You got to remember that,
Whenever someone says something like, I don't know why the studio would do this, I always just go like this. Like, that's why they do everything. Like, it's you can boil it down.
Yeah. That's what pays for the next one.
So Dustin Hoffman said that the problems with movies as an art form is they're a business, and the problems with movie as a business is they're an art form. It's like somewhere you have to find some marriage in between to appease people that want good quality content, but also, make money. So
as they went on, I think the quality of those movies got better and better, not necessarily the stories, which was frustrating to see all that talent. Although there was a Peter Pan sequel. I think it might have been called Return to Neverland.
I think it was.
Whatever. It had a little girl, and it started off, I believe, in World War II, and she's in the rubble, and it was just gorgeously animated and a really wonderful story. And it was just like, wow, that you could have released that in theaters easily,
Yeah, that one came out in 2002, which is so far beyond the first one, right? Like, it's cool that they went back to it, but it was like a long, long, long time.
Yeah, but everybody knew it. It's
exactly.
Peter Pan and had seen it or had it on VHS tape and that sort of thing. I remember when VHS tapes, they first made the decision they were going to release, and I was at Feature still at the time, or at least working in the building. And they were going to release Pinocchio, and there were animators who said, how can they do this? It's this jewel to do that, this very early on in the VHS age. And I said, wait a minute, do you own a copy of Snow White? I think it was like, because I knew he did. He said, yeah. I've even got Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves, the Warner Brothers parody, on it too. He was very excited. I said, so how come you get to have a copy of the film? Yeah. But the guy down the street who loves the picture doesn't have the copy of the film. And it's that sort of thing. And it was not the end of the world. Now, Peter's point about, do the direct to videos hurt features? I don't know. In that,
no, I can't imagine.
Well, think of it this way though. And I'm just talking about 2D features.
Yeah.
Suddenly, and the problem was, of course, every studio started doing them. So it's like, you would have to go back in time and not do Return of Jafar.
Right, of course, yeah.
But although I know Warner or Universal was in the process of doing the same thing. But let's say suddenly kids had access to feature-length 2D animation, beautiful animation, all the time. It was there to watch over and over and over again. If you took that away and then you put out your next 2D film, maybe that would have maintained an audience. Maybe that would have been magical. So when Toy Story came along, maybe those two would continue to exist side by side, because the one was still a rarity and still had its own charms and all that. The other was the new thing that was obviously entertaining and all that, alternate universe stuff. But who knows? Maybe it was that suddenly I get this all the time and it's not as special.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I don't
again,
know. The original was always there, I guess, right? It's just, yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. And I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, but at that time period, it just seems like, I guess I've always been of the mindset that more, and not necessarily, I mean, just saying more is better isn't, fair, because you can make more crap and it's not good. If it just looks like, the Aladdin people, but the story is garbage, like why would you, but it was such good quality that it's like, we're getting more, and it continues the story. We get to see where they go. So I want to keep you all day, but I just had a quick question about, after you'd left Disney, you went on to work with Mike Mignola on those Hellboy animated films.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Oh, it's fantastic. Mike is one of the most creative people.
He seems kind of crabby to me from any of this stuff. Yeah, I know. I saw some of your, oh, wow, that's gorgeous.
Yeah,
that's those original pages.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I'm jealous. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
I have his.
I see your BPRD thing in the background.
Oh yeah, it's not lit up, but I have these. I have all the library editions of that series and the big artist edition that they put out for the. And I actually have one thing I love to show friends. I don't know. I didn't see it in your credits, so I don't know if you're involved with it. But when all the movie stores started closing down, I grabbed this one when they were selling it because I'd never seen it anywhere else. Was the pilot for the Amazing Screw-On Head series? That they only did the pilot. I don't know if did you have anything to do with that, or is that a separate thing?
No, that was a separate group.
It was one of the most. It's one of to me. It's when I really want to visit the universe where that movie or that show got to be a show. I love that pilot. Paul Giamatti, I'm a big fan of him. He's so good. It's fantastic. Yeah, but those cartoons are great. I mean, obviously
we actually wrote the third one. It was like the first one was talking about Hellboy's or Mike's short stories they did with Hellboy. Because if you read Hellboy as it was coming out, it wasn't just like a group of graphic novels. It was, those stories were all divided up. You were getting over time. And then in between, you would get these little short stories. And like in the first one, we actually literally animated one of Mike's short stories of the floating heads, the vampire heads. So that was kind of the tribute there. I feel like I'm always roughest on my own stuff, but I'll try to stay positive. Anyway, that was the short stories. Then the second one was about Hellboy's roots of Central Europe, of vampires and werewolves and witches and all that. The third one was going to be the other side of Hellboy, which is the basically mad scientists, Nazis sign. Yeah. And that one actually had Lobster Johnson in it. There's that little tease at the end of the movie that we did of suggesting Lobster Johnson. We actually wrote that script. It was a lot of fun because the first two, production-wise, had to overlap. We didn't have time to learn what worked and what didn't work. We were like, it was like one long production. Then we had this gap. I did a whole nother movie, Turok, Son of Stone. Anyway, they said, do this, and then you'll do the third Hellboy. I was like, okay, fine. But we had time to, we know what'll work in Hellboy when we did that script. But then they sold the company. They sold it to Stars Media, who was not interested in funding their own projects. They basically bought the company for the library. Didn't even know they had an animation section, but luckily the animation side of things produced The Simpsons. They weren't, it wasn't the writers, and it was literally the company who did the drawings to send overseas to be animated, all that. So that was like, everybody knew The Simpsons. So, it held on for a while, but they didn't want to fund the third Hellboy.
Oh, that sucks. That series always seemed to me, because I just watched, I backed that Kickstarter came out a little while ago that they did, where it's a documentary about him and his style and the Hellboy and everything. Yeah. Drawing Monsters, I think it was called. And I got it and I watched it and I loved it. And that series seemed to me, because I don't know how, I mean, it's fairly public, but he always sort of had a bit of, I wouldn't say dislike, but he was never really a fan of what Del Toro had done with the films, because they kind of got far away from what he did in the comics.
Yeah, I mean, he was very close at Del Toro, but he recognized, much like I said about working on a reboot or consulting or something, that he calls that Del Toro's Hellboy. Yes, and mine, even though, I mean, he even says, "Oh, that's Tad's Hellboy." even though I was really trying to me, it was like, I was a Hellboy fan, so I'm trying to be as close to the comics as possible.
Mhm.
But when it comes down to, literal shot by shot, the new Hellboy movie coming out, and if you've seen the trailer, it's like the first time I've watched a Hellboy trailer that's scary. It's like, oh, that's gonna be a scary movie. I mean, I tried in the trailers for, especially of our second one.
Mhm.
But that one's the closest, because Mike worked through the story and they actually listened to a story. It has like zero budgets.
I hope it's good, but
he said it's the most authentic. In fact, I haven't gone back and reread The Crooked Man, because it's like, well, I don't want to spoil the movie for me. I've forgotten enough of it. But it was like, Hellboy doesn't even have yellow eyes because they didn't have the budget to like put do any sort of CG effect on the eyes. Although it's like, couldn't have done contact lenses. But,
I never.
Mike kind of was more comfortable with that.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, even I worked with Mike on an Atlantis TV show that didn't happen.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was he would be most comfortable if Hellboy had been like the old Sherlock Holmes films, of the 40s.
The Basil Rathbone ones?
Exactly. It's like, no, it's a very small story. It's like, hey, we have a haunted house, or this weird place people walk into and don't walk out. Whatever the thing is that Hellboy and a small team investigates, he'd be fine with that size movie, which my sense is this new movie is closer to that, where it's just, we're not trying to explain the worldview of the Fae folk, and nobody's pregnant with Hellboy's babies and all of that. It's a small film where he goes in and deals with the creepy supernatural element, So I'm looking forward to that. But Mike's very excited about that.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to check it out. I've never I'm always like I try not to judge. I'd rather see it, and judge when seeing it. And I obviously want to support him, so I'm definitely going to go check it out. When I first saw the trailer, there's something about the quality of how it looks filmed. I was like, this seems like a kind of like a fan film, just the way it was like done. But then when it gets into some of the horror elements and like the twisty Crooked Man stuff, I was like, oh, I'm very much here for this. So I'm excited to check that out.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
That version.
But wise it probably was.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe so. But
and Del Toro just basically, even when it comes down to Liz and Hellboy's relationship, that's so drastically different from the comics.
Oh,
because she was like 13 years old when he meets Liz, and he's already been alive since the 40s.
It very much is his own thing. That's skin, like it's using the Hellboy stuff, but to do his own story. And I'm a huge fan of Del Toro. I really would love to see a third one of whatever he's doing, but obviously he's busy with his own things. But you're right. It's like, and especially
that was part of the impetus, I think, of Mike finishing up Hellboy's story. I mean, basically, he sent Hellboy to hell.
Hell yeah.
Finished the story. They continued to do, well, here's a Hellboy story from back in the 50s. Here's a Hellboy story from, whenever time.
Yeah.
So
plus this world is so big, the BPRD, everybody else is still around. You can do so many good stories.
So anyway, I think part of that impetus to get to that story is I have to do my ending before Del Toro does his. Because
I never thought of that.
Pop culture-wise, Del Toro was going to a whole different world. And it's like, how in pop culture, if you have a movie of a certain size, that becomes the story. Everybody says, oh, I know what happened to Hellboy,
Yeah. That's
what's really exciting is right now, Mike has created a new universe. I have no idea what it is, but it's just
really cool.
Aside from everything else, so this is comics, him writing, drawing, and creating a whole new thing. This is when he was supposed to be winding down his career. Of course. No, that's good.
I'm sure you're aware creative types can never just shut it off. You're always going to be doing something. I talked to someone.
He is incredible with this. Yeah. I mean, when I was doing that Turok thing, I said, to me, Turok, because the film was a case where I'm doing somebody else's script, had gone a certain direction. I said, to me, Hellboy, Turok was just simply, it's an Indian discovers a secret valley. He dips his arrows in poison berries that can allow him to fight dinosaurs. And he said, no, it's the story where the Indian finds a hidden valley and dips his arrows into poison berries and kills a Tyrannosaurus, and then he makes a boot out of Tyrannosaurus skin, and he can walk across lava. It's just like you could. Mike doesn't drive, so that when a studio wants a meeting with him, his prerequisite, well, you got to get me there, and like in a car trip from his house to Hollywood or wherever, he's probably come up with ideas for a good 3 or 4 movies, that it was one of those things like, you want to make some money, just put them on retainer for 6 months and say, just give me whatever occurs to you, and
Wow. That's cool.
that would be a fantastic world in his head.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of, not having trouble giving it up, now that you're retired, are you keeping a hand in anything, or you just live in the...
No, well, I always thought I'd play around with comics, and I started to, and my wife, when I was retired, and my wife said, you can't spend 8 hours a day in that little room of yours, meaning this room, which is not much bigger that way than it is this way. And I realized, I mean, it was just a stupid way of thinking of it, but it was like, I didn't give up a well-paying career in animation for a non-paying career in comics. And then since I always tend to think in series, and I wrote and drew 1 issue of something, and then kind of roughed out a second issue. And then it's that thing of, wait, what if this actually is successful?
They got to keep making them. Yeah,
exactly. It's suddenly I have a job again. I didn't want a job again. So it's nice. I mean, I did a bunch of artwork for Dynamite Comics in connection with their Kickstarter. I was going to say
you worked on the Dark Horse, or did you did some writing on the Darkwing Duck comic, didn't you?
In the Boom version, I did a short story that featured Goslin. That was a time travel thing.
Yes, I do remember. Yeah.
I said, look, my conceit is, it makes more sense when you read it the second time. Perhaps it's not a good thing for a comic. But I think it was like page 2 and page 6, whatever, of the 8-pager, or 2 and 7, whatever, are supposed to look almost like the exact same page, except for like this one panel that has the change in it. And it's one where he's falling to his death and all that. And basically in one he dies, and the other he doesn't, because Goslin has gone back in time and sent herself clues and stuff like that. So that was fun. And James Silvani did a great job, illustrating. And in fact, James is about to launch, I don't know how soon, launching a Kickstarter about a project of his about the history of pirates. And one of the ways to fund it is he's going to be selling some of his old original artwork, and he's going to be selling the artwork from that story. So if anybody wants to buy those, check out Silvani Art. Awesome. And I will happily sign them if they ever meet me. I tried to come to Nova Scotia. You guys have a convention coming up in the fall, right? Yeah. And they said, well, we're kind of full of people. Because my last project I did was with an animation studio, Cartoon Conrad, in Nova Scotia, Beaver Banks. And, I was hoping to come out and, meet up with those guys.
Well, they do have a comic-centric one they do in the summer. I think it's gone by this year, but next year, if you don't make it to HowCon, called East Coast Comic Expo, which like Halifax is Nova Scotia, Moncton is capital of New Brunswick, which is the next province over when you're heading into Canada. So that one is run by comic people, and it's very comic centric, but like they do branch out and have other people. So that's always that's one that I always really talk about with the people on the show, because it's a really cool one, and they very much care about comics. So maybe I'll nod to them that you'd be interested. Yeah, 100%.
Because before the pandemic, it was really neat. I got invited to my last big convention was actually in Moscow.
Oh, really?
Darkwing was so huge in Russia when the Soviet Union broke up. It was like some of the first cartoons that went there.
Really?
And in fact,
that is cool.
Earlier, just actually last week, I'm trying to think of what day. No, it was Monday this week. I had lunch with a guy from Azerbaijan who he said, no, they got the Russian TV feed and they saw Darkwing Duck and how important it was to they wanted me to come out to an animation festival. And it's kind of like, your next door neighbor is Iran. 2 countries down is Russia, and Ukraine is there. I don't think I'll be traveling there, nor will my wife let me. But it was neat just in general, seeing the impact the show had, because
Wow.
they hadn't had cartoon adventures like that before. So it was all new to them. But I also got to go to the Netherlands earlier and then all across the United States. But then afterwards, it's like, after the pandemic, give it a year, find out. It's like, okay, I put feelers out, but nobody has bitten. So hopefully people like you can mention their buddies at a convention that they've got, the budget to fly somebody out from California.
Yeah, I just sent them a message. We'll
some
see.
guy from a show from 30 years ago. Yeah.
No, I mean, Darkwing Duck especially is, the legacy of that show. I mean, and many of the other things he worked on as well. I think it persists. I think we'll definitely be seeing more. They'll get back to it. I think we'll see another Darkwing Duck show eventually. In the world we live in.
They've actually got one in development. So.
Oh, do they? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was the one you mentioned that was a spinoff from the other one, but it's a new thing.
Yeah, because that was several years ago.
Yeah.
But no, in fact, it's Point Grey Pictures, the guys who did the Turtles. I just hope, which I thought was brilliant. So I was like, hopefully they use the same taste on Darkwing.
Really?
Like they were going to.
Did the film or doing the TV show version?
No, I mean they're doing a TV show, so they're working with creators and it was delayed, for several reasons with strikes and things like that. Right. But they were going to update me in a little bit, so who knows what it looks like. But
oh wow,
hopefully they've spread their same magic and stuff like that.
Ah, I can't wait. That's awesome. That's very exciting. In fact, I'm more enthralled than ever to go back and I'm overdue to rewatch it, so maybe that'll be my next. I like watching old shows while I do cardio at the gym, so that's a good one.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I have a hard time. I mean, now because I've done all sorts of podcasts because of the Kickstarter campaign for Dynamite. I'll sometimes quote episode titles, and the only reason why I know those episode titles is that fans have brought them up to me so many times, and I'm thinking like, oh, I've turned into that geek. I should tell people what I'm talking about. So instead of saying, well, Neptunia, it's like the aquatic character like Aquaman.
Yeah, right.
So it is, funny in that way. But, again, when I'm consulting on stuff or any of my characters, it's kind of like you doing your own thing. It's like Mike and Del Toro, whatever. And I'll just give my notes. And, people at the start of it said, Tad Stones is going to be a consultant. So, he's not going to let things go. And it's like, you're not getting that definition of consultant, who is a person you pay to give an opinion that you don't have to listen to. Yeah. That's what a consultant is.
You're not showrunner. Like you get
exactly.
Yeah, that's wild. Awesome.
So it was fun to me, and I would definitely love to get up to Nova Scotia because that was my last project, was working with Cartoon Conrad. And for the first time since features, they showed me pencil tests and roughs, and I worked directly with the special effects crew and all that. And they were such a fantastic, studio to work with. And it was a great last project, to go out on.
Was that Jake and the Neverland Pirates?
No, that was, no, I don't know why I've got a credit on Jake.
That shows up. I thought it was your last one.
I did not direct on that one.
Oh.
The last one would have been, it was for Netflix, and it was Kulapari, an Army of Frogs.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
I have a friend that works, I think, in that company, but I'll have to check in to see if he worked on it. I think it's that company, but anyway, that's super cool, man. Well, I don't want to take any of your time. I've taken enough. This is great chat, and it's been an honor chatting with you, dude. Thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate it.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Have a great day, and thanks again for everything.
You too.
Bye. There you have it, my chat with Tad Stone's a super fun time, super cool guy, great chat, and I was overjoyed to chat with him. And big thanks for him for his time and all that great stuff. It was a blast, a real blast. So thanks to Tad, and thanks to you for tuning in. Be sure to tune in another week's time for another fun-filled, action-packed episode. In the meantime, stay safe, have fun, read comics, and go outside. It's nice out there. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.